Hello, friends. This is Mike Williams. My colleague and friend, fellow researcher Sally Whitty, discovered something very interesting about Billy Shears, aka Paul McCartney. Something that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And so, without further ado, here's the show with Sally. Thanks for listening. Well, friends, we have a great show this afternoon. My good friend and colleague, Sally, is with us today. And Sally has made what I consider to be a remarkable and groundbreaking discovery with regard to Billy, also known as Paul McCartney. And it's a discovery that once Sally points it out, once you see it, you cannot unsee it.
We just found something that is going to absolutely blow people's minds. That nobody has discovered this. I honestly think that I was meant to do this. For whatever reason, this affliction that hit me of the millions of people that are quote-unquote Paul McCartney fans, and nobody has spotted this. And maybe part of it is spells. They're so enthralled with the music that they're just not paying attention.
Yeah, I think the other piece of it, Sally, is that a lot of people just don't expect what it is that we're going to talk about.
Yes. Well, if that was not Paul McCartney, I would have known about it. Well, if he had an artificial eye, if he has that, we would know about it. Guess what? Now you've got to find out.
Yes, so what we're going to talk about, folks, is that Billy, a.k.a. Paul McCartney, has an artificial eye. And like I said, we're going to take you through some evidence, and you take a look for yourself. And before we get into that, though, Sally sent me over a little bio. It's a story. And it's a story about Sally and her eye and her journey and how that led her to taking a look into Billy and his artificial eye. And it also will set the table as to why Sally feels drawn to do the research and to understand him as a person a little better. So with that, Sally, let me take the audience through your story. And then once I finish it up, anything you want to add that is not included with what you sent me, you can tack on. As a little girl of 7, I sat in a quiet classroom, fidgeting. The other students concentrated intensely on their tests as they hovered low and close to their desks. This was my first day back in a classroom in a long time, and therefore exempt from the testing. After a traumatic surgery and extended recovery time at home, school seemed a welcome break from the constant doctor visits and prosthetic and rehab appointments. My new eye was strange. I couldn't stop touching it until the unforeseeable happened. It fell out, right upon my open book. It lay there staring at me. Quickly, I snatched it up and looked around the room. All heads were still down. I opened my hand, looked down at my eye, and to my horror, realized not one adult had taught me how to put the imposter back in. After a few fumbling attempts, I stood ever so quietly and silently and made my way to the teacher's desk. I waited for her to notice. She was grading papers and half-heartedly glanced up at me and then went back to her grading. I watched her freeze as the processing of what she had just witnessed took hold. She put both hands across her mouth and she let out a small muffle, then pointed to the door. In the hallway, down the hall, I began to cry. I made her scream. In the bathroom with tears streaming, I couldn't figure out my reflection in the mirror, the socket, and my dexterity while I was sobbing. After what seemed hours, my teacher walked in crying as well. 4 shaking hands dropped the eye time after time, leading to nervous laughter, until we managed to get it back in. We were so happy, we hugged with happy tears. I felt empowered. I had mastered a milestone in my life, the one with the removable eye. I felt as if my fellow students sensed it too. For the rest of the day, the students parted ways to let me pass. In the cafeteria, they kept their distance. It was when I got home and looked in the mirror that I understood the students' reaction. We had put my eye in upside down. I've told that story dozens of times, and it always makes people wince, then laugh. Just as in the hospital, when I made the medical staff laugh and tried to make them feel better when they worked with me. If you make a person laugh, a bond forms, and they become more empathetic and gentler with a needle. When I was 11, I was on my way to another ocularist appointment. For those who don't know, it is the occupation of making artificial eyes. It's an art associated with Freemasons, when their beliefs and traditions were persecuted. They went low and virtually out of sight, save for the eye they hung out of their businesses to alert their brethren of their presence. As my mother drove, it began to snow. It reminded me of a dream I had the night before. In the dream, I found my sweet horse dead under a pile of snow. I told my mom about the dream as we headed toward our appointment. When we made it home, I rushed to check on my horse. My jet pony was dead under a pile of snow. I felt responsible. I was angry. I wanted to remove my eye and crash it against the nearest tree. If I hadn't had to make another one of those visits, maybe I could have saved my horse. Jet was one of the twin horses. The breeder kept his twin, which was a beautiful paint. My Jet was an Appaloosa that seemed to change colors with the seasons. On the other side of the world, a man, quote, born under the astrological sign of Gemini, the twins, wrote a song about his children's pony by the name of Jet. He rode his horse on the farm with his lovely wife and their Appaloosas. He rides an Appaloosa to this day. Years later, I had children of my own. I still remember where I was and what I was doing when I heard the sad news that the man's wife had died. My 3 sweet children and I bowed our heads and prayed for the man's broken heart. Several years ago, I happened upon a book that, after reading it, changed my entire perspective on reality and how we choose to perceive it. The Memoirs of Billy Shears brutally changed the truth of perhaps every narrative known to me. The first time I read the book, it frightened me enough to sleep with the lights on. The third time I spoke of it in Mike Williams' roundtable discussion, I wept when mentioning the chapter on landmines. I couldn't get through it, so Mike had to move to another guest. In a future presentation, Mike and I will discuss the gematria code contained within Memoirs concerning the truths of mythology and how it pertains to William. But first, we will show the broken side of William and how he and I share that affliction. The Eye of Ra, the right eye, represents the sun, or the male. The Eye of Horus, which is the left eye, represents the moon, or the feminine. William's right eye was taken, and he could only see with his left. My left eye was taken, and I see with my right. To borrow a reconstructed phrase from Neil Diamond, he is the sun, I am the moon, play me. I can only conclude that to resist the attraction and pull I have towards this man would be futile. Astrologically, it's written in the stars. The man I speak of was born William Shepard. You know him as Sir Paul McCartney. Now let me show you what I have found. So Sally, is there anything else that you wanted to bring to the audience's attention before we jump into the slides?
Yeah, I thought it was just a few weeks ago that I was listening to an interview with Liam, and he mentioned the whole story about the song Jet, how it started off as a song about his kid's pony, and it just triggered off all these memories of what happened to me, and that can't be by accident that all of this came full circle.
Yeah, there's a lot of connection points between your life experiences and what we're learning about Billy. Yeah, it is very interesting.
And I've always had, a great heart for him and learning about reading memoirs, and I've read it quite a few times. I've always had a real heart for him, but boy, this puts it on a completely different level. It's cathartic for me, if you want to put it that way.
What do you say to people? Because every once in a while when I put the roundtables up, and you would mention that you liked Billy, that you have an affinity for him, and sometimes comments will come in and people just go out of their minds. How could you like him? He's a deceiver. He's a liar. How do you address that when people make those comments?
I would just say, put yourself in his shoes. I mean, some of the situations that he was put in and forced to do, I mean, you can't just make a blanket statement without taking into consideration that, did he have a choice in this? I don't think he did. I mean, and I'm convinced that the whole eye thing was part of satanic ritual abuse. I think they did this to him.
So this is something that is covered in Memoirs. They don't talk about the eye, but Memoirs does tell us that he was subjected to ritual abuse, starting at the age of 3, if I recall. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in the book it tells us that some of that abuse was traumatic, very traumatic, and other forms of it were rewarding. That's how trauma-based mind control and programming works, folks. It's not all negative. There's also positive reinforcement.
Let me just say this one other thing, that when they removed my eye for about a week, every time I would open up to look, I would vomit. And it's because when you remove an eye, it tricks the brain. It confuses the brain because now you're not seeing double anymore. You don't have 3D vision, and it results in you having dizziness and all the things that result in it. And, I have nothing but empathy for this man because I've been through what he's been through, or some of it. So, I mean, let's just put that out there.
Yeah, basically blind in one eye.
Yes.
Folks, we were going to cover this as part of a much larger presentation. We were going to talk about Pan and the mythology around Pan. But Sally and I spoke, and we felt that this was too important to just kind of throw in with a larger presentation and make it essentially a subset. We decided not to do that. But with that, Sally, you did do a tremendous amount of work looking into Billy and his connection into mythology, especially as it connects into Pan. And he also connects into Horus and Osiris and all that. But the Pan aspect of it is also extremely intriguing. We're not going to get into that, folks, in this presentation, but what we do want to do is show you a couple of connection points so that we can whet your appetite. Sally, let's move to the slide where you have 2 images, one of Billy from Driving Rain and another image on the right of Pan. And, of course, you and I will agree that that's not coincidence.
Yeah, when I first started going into studying about Pan, and that was all because of Crowley, and Crowley, even at his funeral, had a poem written to Pan. I started looking into it, and there was some things that were descriptions of Pan that I went, well, that sounds a lot like Bill.
Yeah.
And then I came across the picture of Pan jumping over the fence. And I went, that reminds me of something. What is it? And then I went and looked and found the Driving Rain. And it was like, there's no way this is a coincidence. So I knew I was on the right path. I knew I was headed in the right direction with what I was looking into.
Right. And we're going to get more into this. And the one thing, Sally, I know you know this, as we go through this research, and we've been doing it for a long time now, the connection into mythology is undeniable, which tells us that the cultic elite, the controllers, the Illuminati, whatever label you want to give them, this is their belief system. This is their philosophy. This is their ideology. This is essentially their religion. That's how I kind of look at it.
Absolutely. And this all goes back to when Christianity finally took hold. One of the things that Christians were always professing is that Pan is dead. In other words, they were signaling that all of the old gods are dead. And this new god, and I heard an expression a few weeks ago that said, when you kill off the old gods, then the new religion considers the old gods devils. And so you take that into consideration is that when Christianity took hold, one of the things that they did was kill anybody. They tortured them. They killed them. Anybody that wasn't going to embrace their new god, they would torture them and kill them. I mean, and they turned the old gods into devils.
Yeah, and they built their houses of worship, well, the Roman Church did, on top of the old pagan religious sites. And that was a way of showing conquest,
Yes.
that they prevailed. So out with the old, in with the new.
And so in 1962, in Memoirs, the pagan religion shot back and declared war on Christianity. And those of us who are just sitting there watching this war take place, 99% of the people, it goes right over their heads. They're not understanding that so many corporations, they have the names of old gods. Those of us are just kind of sitting back watching this take place. That's exactly what's going on. I heard you talking the other day about the war that's going on in the heavens.
Right.
There is stuff going on, and most of the people are just not paying attention.
Yeah, the other point I want to make too, Sally, is because people jump to conclusions many times, and they'll say, because we're talking about this, we are pro-pagan, anti-Christian. And I just want to make it clear to everybody that we're doing research, and we're trying to understand what the puts and takes are, what's going down. That's what we're doing. So I just want to make sure that's clear. So when we talk about this stuff, we're talking about what the controllers are doing and how they're doing it. So try to keep from having a knee-jerk reaction and going at either myself or Sally about what it is that we believe or what we support or what we agree with or don't agree with, because that is not what this is about. I just want to make that clear. So we're looking at the slide, Driving Rain and Pan, and again, that is not coincidence. So Billy is telling us that he's tied back to Pan, he's tied back to Dionysus, he's tied back to Horus. So all of these mythological beings, and by the way, when we talk about mythology, that does not mean that it's fiction. That's another thing, that's another trap that a lot of people fall into. Because they hear the word mythology, they believe it couldn't possibly have happened.
That it was a myth.
Right. But there is another god, Sally, that you have looked into. And this is a god with one eye, and that would be Odin/Woden?
Woden, yes.
Tell us about Odin and Woden.
Odin was a god that his eye was removed for greater insight. He hung on a tree for 9 days, and this is when you watch the Marvel movies. They show you Anthony Hopkins plays Odin or Woden. I believe the name Woden was first, and then Odin came after. And this is where we get Wednesday from. We have Thursday named after Thor, and Wednesday is named after Woden.
Yes, Wednesday, Woden Day.
Yes.
Right. And I highlighted a couple of the sentences here on this chart, Sally, and it says Odin was a war god, protector of heroes. Fallen heroes joined him in Valhalla. Odin was a great magician among the gods.
Mm-hmm.
He was also the god of poets, and he had only one eye. The other he gave in exchange, and you mentioned this, for wisdom. And so, again, we go back to mythology, we go back to the one-eyed gods.
And magic.
And magic.
And those little emblems that you have there.
We have the image of Odin/Woden on the right-hand side of the chart, folks. Bottom left is the Woden staff. And if we take a look at the Epiphone logo, the Epiphone guitars, that looks a lot like the staff. And we're going to see a clip later on where Billy is playing an Epiphone guitar, and there's a lot more going on in that clip, and Sally will take us through it. But what's happening is all of these little clues are interwoven into the songs, into the videos. Most people don't see it because they don't understand it. They don't know what they're looking for. But again, once it's pointed out and once you see it, you can't unsee it. So as soon as, Sally, you showed me the Woden staff, I said, well, that's the Epiphone logo that they put on many of their pick guards. Many companies, especially those in the corporate matrix, they're constantly bringing in the mythological and occulted symbols.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's another example, Epiphone. Now let's get into Billy's eye, and we're going to start with a chart that's titled Ocular prosthesis. And this is sourced from Wikipedia. So what I'm going to do, Sally, let me read this and then you can tack on to the narrative here. An ocular prosthesis, artificial eye or glass eye, is a type of craniofacial prosthesis that replaces an absent natural eye. The prosthesis fits over an orbital implant and under the eyelids. Though often referred to as a glass eye, the ocular prosthesis roughly takes the shape of a convex shell and is made of a medical-grade plastic acrylic. A few ocular prostheses today are made of cryolite glass. A variant of the ocular prosthesis is a very thin, hard shell which can be worn over a damaged or eviscerated eye. Makers of ocular prosthetics are known as ocularists. An ocular prosthesis does not provide vision. Someone with an ocular prosthesis is altogether blind on the affected side and has one-sided vision. And so that's what we're talking about with Billy, correct, Sally?
Yes, absolutely. There could be some type of, they could have left something in there and they just damaged the eye so that they could fit something on top of it. But they definitely took his vision away.
Okay.
And they have worked really, really hard to disguise this. If you think about it, the gig would have been up pretty quick if somebody had figured it out because Paul, the real Paul, did not have this situation. And Horus, being persona that he has taken over, is a one-eyed god.
Right. Well, it's the Eye of Ra, the Eye of Horus. That's where we're going with this, right?
Absolutely.
So, and it will make some sense, folks, in a moment. Now, when you say when they did this to him, is it possible that nobody did this to him, that perhaps it was just an accident when he was younger?
It could very well be, but the fact that it goes right along with everything that we're about to reveal in terms of Odin
and the Eye of Horus, right?
Right.
So it leads us to believe, and I agree with Sally, folks. I believe that Billy's loss of eyesight in his right eye has something to do with ritual abuse. Now, could we be wrong? We could be, but that's my leaning. And to the right of the slide, Sally, I show an example of what a prosthetic eye looks like. And I think there's probably a misconception out there that these eyes are round, look like marbles, and you pop them in. But that's not what they're like.
No. There is when they remove the eye, like in my particular case, I was told that I had picked up a parasite, very rare. I mean, they talked about the astronomical odds of me having this is just beyond belief. But I picked up a parasite from a cat, and they had to remove the eye to keep it from moving to the other eye and to my brain. And anyway, when they take the eye out, they have to put what is called an implant. And they put the implant in there. They take the eye out and they make a slit and they put the implant between your socket and the brain. And it is a little ball that is left inside there. So in just the same way that you take eye contacts and put them on the ball of your eyes, you would do the same thing with an artificial eye. It fits on that implant. It's not a ball. It's shaped like a contact lens.
It's harder than a contact lens, though, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I've dropped mine quite a few times. It's never shattered. So.
Yeah, because it tells us it's medical grade plastic acrylic. So.
Yeah.
But again, it's not, folks. It's not a big ball or a marble. This is what Billy has in his right eye. Now, I'm going to go to slide number 9. And Sally, this is the first slide where I have a picture of an older Billy on the left and Vivian Stanshall from the Bonzos. And the reason why I'm showing this slide, folks, is because it goes back to 2019, 3 years ago, when I did my presentation on McCartney and Stanshall. And this was one of the slides that I had in the presentation because I look at this and I said, this is the same person. The guy on the left just happens to be older. But one of the things that I called out in that presentation was I thought that Billy had a wandering left eye. In other words, it kind of drifted a little bit. And so if we look at this image, you can see in both images, Billy on the left and Stanshall on the right, If we take a look at the left eye, which is the eye that would be on your right as you're looking at the computer monitor, we can see it drifts. And so I looked at this as a facial characteristic that allowed me to compare Billy as McCartney and Billy as Stanshall, that he had this eye that drifted. But what I didn't realize, it wasn't his left eye that was drifting. His left eye is okay. The issue was the right eye, because the right eye is an ocular prosthetic. It's a glass eye.
Yep.
And that is what Sally figured out.
Now, but this picture, the one on the left, you see how that lid is really fat. One of the things in the artificial eye world is, they will paint the eye to match the other eye. They sit there and they just meticulously paint it. But then they work at once they get it fitted, they're trying to make it look as much like the other one as possible. But there's something, like I said, in the artificial eye world, is that we call it lifting the lid. And if you'll notice that the lid, his eyelid on the right side, is, 3 times bigger than the one on the left.
Yes, you're talking about the image of where he's the older McCartney, his right eye, the eye on our left as we're looking at the image. The eyelid up top is, it looks like it's protruding. And
that's from a hard plastic that's in there as opposed to a soft eyeball.
We don't see it so much on the Stanshall, though. Why would that be?
Because he's younger. Things have a way of deteriorating the older you get.
Okay. And we're going to see this protruding eyelid some more, folks, in an upcoming slide. So what I did next, I did a slide, and Sally has seen the slide, where I boxed out the right-hand side and then the left-hand side of the images I just showed you of an older Billy and then when he was playing Vivian Stanshall. So if we take a look at the first image, the right eye looks straight ahead. Then when I take that same image and I move the blue box over to the left, and now I'm seeing the left-hand side of his face, we can see that it appears that his left eye is looking to the left. Is that making sense, Sally?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so the first image on the left, folks, let me repeat this. I boxed out the left-hand side of his face, so we see the right-hand side of his face. The right-hand side of his face is where we have the glass eye, and he appears to be looking straight ahead. When I then move the box over and I block out the right-hand side of his face, and we're looking at the left-hand side of his face, that's picture number 2, we can see his eye glancing to the left. If I move over to the third image of Stanshall, it's the same thing. When I block out the left-hand side of Stanshall's face, we can see his right eye is looking straight at us. And then the fourth image, I move the blue box over, I slide it over to the left, and now the right-hand side of Vivian Stanshall's face is blocked out, and we're now looking at the left-hand side of his face. And we can again see that his eye is looking to the left. So where I thought that the left eye was a wandering or drifting eye, no. That's his natural eye. He sees with his left eye. It's the right eye that is the prosthetic.
And when we get to the video, it'll become very, very apparent.
Right. And so this also, folks, becomes evidence that Billy did play Vivian Stanshall of the Bonzos. Because you would have to ask yourself, what are the odds that this would happen? And I would say that those odds are extremely low, that something like this would be a coincidence. All right, so if you want to pause the video at this point, please do so if you want to take a closer look. Now, if I move to slide number 12, I did the same thing with an image that Sally sent over to me, and she took a screen capture from Billy when he was performing at the Ed Sullivan Theater in 1992, so 30 years ago. So if we look at the far left image, we can see his eyes are wide open. And at first glance, you don't think much about it. You're just looking at it, and it just looks like he's looking to the left. But when I divide up the face, blocked out in image number 2, Billy's left side of his face, which is on our right, and take a look at how his eye is looking again, almost straight ahead. And that is his glass eye. If I then take the same image on the far right and I block off the right-hand side of his face and we're only looking at the left-hand side of his face, that's his natural eye. That's the eye he sees with. See how far to the left it's looking? So compare image 2, where the left-hand side of his face is blocked off, with image number 3, where the right-hand side of his face is blocked off, and take a look at the eyes. It's the same thing that we had in the previous image with an older Billy and Stanshall. The right eye, the eye he's blind in, is looking straight ahead, while his good eye is looking off to the left. Now let me take a look at this image here. Now Sally, you sent this one, and the title of the chart is The Right Eyelid Protrudes. So take us through this again, because you explained this where the artificial eye tends to make the eyelid pop out or protrude.
Yep.
So again, explain why that happens.
Because the real eye, everything just works in there perfect, and the lid, and it's soft, so you have the lid that folds over it and closes and all that kind of stuff. When you have and artificial eyes are very, very hard. It just can't fit in there. You just can't get it completely perfect. And that was like I said, my first clue, because I most of the time just watched interviews with him and I made eye contact and my good eye looked into his good eye. But when I looked over to the other side, I went, man, that reminds me of me. And it was just a matter of time where I picked up, that's, wow, am I seeing this? I can't believe, so it was, anyway, the lid is, it's going over hard plastic. And he does a really good job with blinking. That's another thing that they really have to tweak when they're trying to get your artificial eye to look like the real one, is whether or not there's a balancing act between having it big enough to move around in there, but not too big that your eye can't close all the way.
How does the eye move, Sally? Let me ask that question. So he's got this artificial eye. So how does it move left and right?
That implant that I talked about,
yeah,
it's permanently in your body. When they remove the eye, and in his case, it may be completely different. It may be that thing that we talked about, that they damaged the eye so bad in whatever ritual abuse that they did to him, that this fits over the top of it to make it look real. If they purposely did it to him, it could be, like I said, one of two things, and the previous description talked about that, is that it could be that they damaged the eye, and so this fits on top of the eye, and so the eye still moves around, but it still will drift. There are problems that you can have, because it's sitting right on top of this ball inside there. You can get air pockets in it, and we're going to go to the video in a little bit, where his eye is just roaming all over the place, and then he reaches up, and he's trying to be very cool about it, but he reaches up and he rubs his eye, and all of a sudden the eye stops drifting. You can get air pockets in there, and it starts just shifting all over the place.
So is the artificial eye, how is it attached to the implant? Is it attached?
So when they first removed my eye, they took the eye out, and then, like I said, they made a slit, and they put a ball inside between the socket and the brain, and then they sewed it up. And that's called an implant, and it moves around inside that socket, and it stays there permanently. And then they use the artificial eye, and it fits on that implant that moves around just like the other one. It fits on there just like a eye contact.
So it's connected in a way that the implant will move right or left based upon... Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and just like I said, there's some stuff that you can zoom in on his eye, and he very easily could have just an extremely damaged eye.
Yeah.
And they've put this on top of the damaged eye.
Right.
To make it look real. But the important thing, if you think about the abuse, the important thing is to remove the vision from that eye. And we'll talk about that in a minute with the quote from Matthew.
Yes. So let's move to the next slide because this is very interesting. So we're going to talk about some subliminal clues. And the first one is, if we look at the Let It Be album and we look at Billy, we can see that his right eye, which is on our left, is shadowed out. So this is the one eye symbolism that we see all the time. We see it on the With the Beatles and Meet the Beatles album as an example, where the faces are shadowed out. But in this case, we've got Billy's right side shadowed out, and that's the eye that he cannot see out of. The other thing I noted once you pointed out the Let It Be album and the shadow effect on Billy's face on the right-hand side is the other Beatles are looking to the right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one-eyed symbolism, the Eye of Ra, Eye of Horus. I don't think it's any coincidence that his right eye he cannot see out of, he's blind in his right eye, and the other Beatles are looking to the right.
Yep.
Okay, just an observation on my part. Now, if we move to the next slide, some more subliminal clues. You sent this one over to me where we have Linda looking very intently at Billy. And what did you make of this image?
Talking to and my children do this all the time, is that they focus on the eye that can see. They don't make direct eye contact with one eye to another. You will see them looking at my right eye all the time, because that's the one that's seeing them. And this is what she is doing. You look at that picture, that is what she is doing. She is communicating with the left eye that sees.
Okay, and what I would like to do is to ask our listeners to get an idea of what this is like. Take your right eye and close it, and then only see with your left eye. And try to look to the right. So if somebody is on the right-hand side of you and they're speaking to you, you can't see them. Your nose gets in the way.
Yep.
It's fenced off. So what Sally is saying is Linda is speaking to him and ensuring that he can see her because he can only see with his left eye.
Yep.
And then a very, very strange image to the right. And I've had this on my hard drive for the longest time. And I kept it because I was thinking in terms of one-eyed symbolism, which, of course, it does play into that. But those are ocular prosthetics, are they not, Sally?
That's what those are. That's what he's doing. That is a predictive program, if you want to put it that way. Because that's Paul, right?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it?
That's a good question. Okay, whoever that guy is, he's showing you predictive programming.
Yeah, he's a person that looks like Paul.
Yeah.
In fact, I think his hair is parted on the wrong side.
Yeah, yeah.
But in any case, this person that looks like Paul McCartney is holding up two glass eyes. Again, what are the chances? What's the probability of that? Another clue for us all. All right, the next slide, slide number 16, some more clues. So here we have a wax of Paul McCartney, and there's the one-eyed symbolism again.
Yes, and they use artificial eyes in those wax images. He's showing you right there.
And then we have the same thing going on, Sally, with the image on the right. We have the Eye of Ra symbolism going on again.
It's right there, folks. It's right there.
Okay, so we're going to show you some video clips. And the first one, Sally found this, and it's a great catch. And we have Billy pointing to himself and then tapping himself when he says Billy Shears. So he's letting us know, again, that he's not Paul McCartney, that he's Billy Shears. And he points to the audience. Now, not only is he pointing to the audience, but I will argue that he's making the Grand Pontiff pose. And in Freemasonry, Pontiff doesn't mean Pope. It means bridge builder. So he points, and then he taps himself when he says Billy Shears. Okay, so let's take a listen to this clip. Okay, so that was very interesting, Sally. It was a great catch. You sent that clip over to me. And as we have always said, he's constantly dropping clues and telling people he's not Paul McCartney. Now, the second clip is an interview. I don't know who's interviewing him. You sent this over to me, and this is one where you have a close-up of his eyes, and it becomes obvious that his right eye is kind of floating around a little bit, and at one point he kind of touches his eye, I'm guessing, to kind of reset it and put it back in place. Is that what he's doing?
Yeah, like I said, sometimes you get an air pocket in there, and just by pressing on it, the air pocket goes out, and then it adjusts, because it'll free float from that air in there, and he's reaching up. You know, he's been coached how to do this stuff.
All right, so let me play that clip now. In fact, what I'm going to do, folks, is turn the volume down on this clip because the volume doesn't really matter. What we want to do is to focus on his eyes and focus on his right eye. And so, Sally, I'm going to start right now at 1, 2, and 3.
You can
Take a look at his
clearly
right eye.
see. You can clearly see there is an edge to that eye. It's probably what we talked about, but it's, setting on something else, whether it's an implant or whether it's a real eye. But you can see it's drifting around, and in a minute he will reach up and rub that eye, and what that does, there he goes, right there.
So, Sally, again, what was he doing when he touched his eye? Was he just resetting it?
Yeah, you could say that. Sometimes they will get air bubbles underneath there, and when the air bubble gets between the eye and the implant, it will cause the thing to just drift and move around and everything like that. And when a person with an artificial eye is tired, sometimes it won't move as well either. But what he's doing there, when he reaches up and rubs his eye, is that he either set it back down on the implant and probably removed air pocket out of it. And then as soon as he rubs it, you'll notice it starts matching.
Okay, I'm going to play it again. So I'm starting at the 15-second mark so that the audience can take another look at it. And we can see the right eye it's drifting.
Yep.
We can really see it at this point here where it basically shoots far right. And then he touches it.
Yep. And it starts moving with the other one. That's what he's doing.
Okay, so the next clip, Sally, is another one you sent over to me. It was Good Morning America, November 1980. And what is it that we're looking for here in this clip?
Well, I mean, when I saw this one, I was like, there's no way I'm imagining this. His eyes is not moving with the other one. He's got the puffy eyelid, and, it's whatever the time difference, they're on the other side of the world, and I think they're in London. So he could be tired. It could be what it is. This is Good Morning America, so this guy that's interviewing him is early in the morning, and it could be late in the evening for him, and he could just simply be tired. But it's very obvious. Watching the eye move around, it doesn't move as well as the other one. You got the puffy eyelid. It's very well. Just like you said, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Okay, so I'm going to start at the 53-second mark, Sally. So let me play that now.
Ready?
I just started. Yep, I started the clip. And he's on a television set. Okay, so now they're on him.
Yeah.
We can see the right eye
drifting.
Look at the right eye.
It is so different than the left. It's moving off in different directions. The eyelid is much fatter than the real eye.
Yep.
And it could be right then and there he's tired. My eye does the same thing when I get tired. It doesn't move as well.
Okay, so now it's the Ed Sullivan Theater, 1992. He's singing My Love. And what are we looking for here?
Watch. The left eye is seeing anything, and he is looking up in the audience at people that are in the audience, because after the song, as a matter of fact, you have it on this video where for just a split second as he's looking up in the audience, you'll see him just a tiny bit smile. And after the song is over with, he points out to the person that he was smiling at and said, I saw you cuddling up. That's what he said. So, in other words, it was a romantic song, and whoever it was reached over and probably grabbed his wife and pulled her close or whatever. But anyway, he acknowledged that. But he's looking up in the audience, and watch the left eye. That is the one that is seeing. The other one is just following after it. The reason, if you'll notice that every time he sits at the piano, the microphone stand always comes from the right-hand side. The right-hand side is his blind side. If the microphone stand was on his left side, it would block his vision, because he only sees on that side. So he always has the microphone stand coming from the right-hand side. And in a little bit, we're going to watch video where he has to maneuver around that microphone stand so that he can see the guitar player. It's very, very obvious.
Okay, so let me play this. I'm going to start at 1 minute 53 seconds, Sally. Okay, so I'll play that now. Okay, so he's at the piano now. And like you said, the microphone is positioned near his right eye, or his right side of his face.
The blind side of him.
Yep.
Now, watch the left eye. Watch how he turns his head to be able to see with his left eye. When he goes, whoa, 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 he always lines his left eye up with the microphone. Very subtle, but once you see it.
Yeah, and we can see his right eye. It's drifting a little bit. In other words, it's not perfectly in sync with his left eye.
Yeah. But if you watch it a few times, you'll see that left eye is what is seeing. That left eye is where he's maneuvering it around to be able to see whatever he's looking at. The right eye just follows after it.
I just stopped it now at 3 minutes 17 seconds. And here's another example where the left eye, his good eye, is looking all the way to the left. And the right eye is not quite there.
Yeah.
I started it again.
And if you want to look at it from energy, right, or life force, or soul, the eye is the mirror of the soul. All the energy is coming out of that left side, not the right.
Like we said, once you see it, you cannot unsee it.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Okay, it is amazing. So the next clip now is My Valentine, featuring Natalie Portman and Johnny Depp. And what did you want to say about this? Other than the fact, I noticed right off the bat, we have the one-eyed symbolism, the shadowing effect taking place. Is there anything else that we should know about this?
I think that they're trying to tell you right there in that video. The light is on the left side. What he's seeing is on the left side. I think that because he did it with both of them, and it's his song. So that's just a very subtle clue. They are showing the left eye. They're illuminating the left eye. My Valentine is based upon Remus and Romulus. It goes all the way back to that. And these are gods. And Remus and Romulus were raised by a she-wolf. And this is where Romulus defeated Remus, killed him, and then he founded Rome. And Rome is where we get the Lupercalia, and that's where we get the tradition of Valentine from. Now, the name of the album was called Kisses on the Bottom. And there's a very famous picture of the she-wolf that nursed Remus and Romulus. And the she-wolf is licking them on the bottom to clean them. And I think this is where we get the name Kisses on the Bottom.
Okay.
This goes all the way back to Greek mythology, folks.
Well, I'm going to play the clip now, so I'm going to start at 3 minutes, 53 seconds. Let's call it 3 minutes, 54 seconds, Sally. Okay, so let me play that now. And again, folks, I'm not going to play the music. That's not what this is about. And we can see the shadowing effect on Natalie Portman. And she actually points to her right eye.
Yeah, yeah.
It's still on Natalie Portman.
Yeah.
And it'll shift over to Johnny Depp soon. And again, folks, notice the shadowing effect on the right eye. This is the same thing we have on the Let It Be album with Billy on the top right of the album cover.
Yep. You know, if we were just watching this without everything else that we have found out, then we would just go, well, this is, you know, they're occult shadowing. Yeah. But what we know about William's situation is this is what they're doing.
And also, both of them did the Osiris Risen.
Yes, they did.
Okay, let me just stop it there. So there's a lot going on in that video, as there is with most music videos, but especially videos that Billy puts out. Now, the next one, Sally, is the making of Queenie Eye. And again, we want to take a look at Billy himself. So I'm not going to play any sound, just look at his eyes. There's also a part of the video that I'm going to show you where we see two twins. It's very quick, and I will show it to you, and then I will slow it down. And there's a reason why Billy has twins in the video. And this goes back to Billy and Biological Paul. Biological Paul was a Gemini. It's all about the twins. In another video, I explained what the twins mean from an occult perspective. So this is another motif that makes its way into a lot of his work, this whole concept of twins. So, Sally, I'm at 5 minutes, 15 seconds, and Billy's walking into Abbey Road Studios.
Yeah, watch the left eye. When he makes contact with eye contact with the cameraman. And in memoirs, he mentions he's the queen on the chessboard.
Yeah, I just stopped it for a moment there. We could see his right eye. Again, it's very good as far as staying in sync most of the time, but it does have a tendency to lag.
Yeah.
And you do see it. Now, what were you saying about Queenie Eye?
Yeah, in memoirs, in the chapter on the Sonic checkmate, he called himself the queen that continues after the king dies, and Paul is the king. And he can move all over the chessboard. Remember the chapter on the Sonic? But he calls himself the queen.
Yeah.
And this is Queenie Eye, not Queenie Eyes, Queenie Eye.
One eye.
Yep. Every one of these things are clues. He's actually pretty brilliant.
I'm sure he's been trained very well.
Oh yeah, yeah, and he's got people, you know, coaching him all the time. He's not doing this by himself. And he's been trained by cameramen. I mean, he's trained cameramen where they need to shoot from any interview, just about any interview you see him in, it's always from the left side.
Yep. We're at that scene now with the twins, and they're lying on the floor. If we look at the clapperboard, the numbers total to the number 10. 1, 0, 0, 3, 5, 0, 0, 1. And of course, 10 is a number that we're seeing more and more now with Billy. It's the number of completion and new beginnings.
Yeah.
So I'm at 6 minutes, 47 seconds, and I'm going to continue playing.
Yeah, that's 647. I don't think is an accident either. Because 6 flipped over is 9, and 4 plus 7 is 11.
Yeah, so that's either 611 or 911.
Yep.
Right, and 611, 6 times 11 is 66. And you know how all that works. Now, the next one is the New World Tour from Mexico 1993, and it's Let It Be. And I think this is the one where he looks over to the guitar player, and you can see that he's looking over and he's making his line of sight with his left eye.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Is that what this is about?
Yep. Watch him navigate that left eye around the microphone stand, trying to be able to see what the guitar player's doing.
So again, folks, what we're looking at here is Billy looking with his left eye to catch his guitar player playing. It looks natural, but just knowing what we know, take a look at how he's positioning his head.
Right. He navigates around that microphone stand.
And then he also takes his hand again and he rubs his right eye. So I'm going to assume, Sally, that was like the clip we saw before where he was trying to maybe get an air pocket out or reposition his eye.
Right. And you can very easily see it adjust. You can see it slide over and move into where it's supposed to go after he rubs it. It's very subtle, happens really quick, but watch the eye right after he rubs it. You will see it shift over into place.
Okay, so let's take a look at that now. So I'm at 7:09, 7 minutes, 9 seconds, and I'll just play through. At 3, 2, and 1, play.
Watch the eye. Yep. Okay, watch the hand go up. Now watch him rub his right eye and watch the eye shift.
Yep.
Did you catch it?
Yep. Okay, so the next clip is a quick one. It's Spies Like Us from 1985, and in this clip, he covers his left eye. It's a real quick clip, and somebody might say, oh, what's the big deal? He just covered his left eye with his hand. But knowing what we know now, he sees with his left eye, his right eye, he's blind in his right eye. It starts to make some sense. So I'm at 7 minutes, 40 seconds, Sally.
I'm right at 7:40, yeah.
Okay, so 3, 2, 1, and play.
Okay. All this stuff that's going on with Spies Like Us and the stupid thing that Chevy Chase does. And then he covers his eye. Now, what he's doing when you see something that you think is ridiculous or you're scared, you would cover both eyes so that you can't see it. He covers the one eye that can see. This is another clue.
Okay, so now we have a tug of war clip. It's a very short clip. And what we're looking for here is the moon and Woden symbolism. Now, the moon is important, folks, because the left eye represents the moon.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The right eye, the eye of Ra, is the sun. And so since Billy cannot see out of his right eye, he sees out of his left eye, that's symbolic of the moon. Do I have that right, Sally?
Yep.
And then on his guitar, he's playing an Epiphone, and as we explained earlier, the E in Epiphone, that logo, it looks exactly like Woden's staff. So we've got two things going on there. So we have Woden or Odin, who was a one-eyed god, who gave up one of his eyes in order to have infinite wisdom. And the left eye is representative of the moon, and the right eye is representative of the sun. Billy cannot see out of his right eye, so there is no sun. There is only the moon. So here's another clue. And again, it would just look artistic if we didn't know what we know or what it is that we're figuring out. But let's play that clip now. So, Sally, I'm at 7 minutes, 52 seconds.
Okay.
So 3, 2, and 1, play.
And there's the moon, and there's the Woden sign on his guitar. Also, in mythology, we learn that Pan was in love with Selene, who was the moon.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so the last clip we have for you folks is Percy Thrillington. This is an album that Billy did. It was an alias that he used. And this one I will play the audio for, because he says there's a lot more going on than you see. And again, it's another clue. He's telling you that the album and the symbolism on the album is much more than what you think, if you're even thinking about it. Many people aren't even thinking about it. So I'm at 8 minutes, 8 seconds, Sally. Yep, 3, 2, and 1, play.
Percy Thrillington is one of a handful of albums Paul recorded without using the McCartney name and fame.
Percy Thrillington. There's a lot more going on than you see. People don't know it goes a lot deeper.
A lot like the Ram on the Ram album as well.
Right, and the Ram goes back to Egypt. So again, it's backing into the Egyptian mysteries.
And if you study, really get deep into mythology, Pan is rumored to have had a twin, which is really interesting that they put that twin symbolism in there.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the segments, little clips that we picked out for everybody, and I hope that it made sense. It made sense to me, Sally, and the clips came from Sally, so thank you so much for sending them over. We talked about Pan, and we're going to talk a lot more about Pan once we get that presentation together with Sally. We talked about Odin, a one-eyed god, who gave up one of his eyes so that he can have wisdom. But ultimately, with my research, and Sally, I think you might agree, with Billy, it goes back to Egypt.
Right.
With Crowley, it goes back to Egypt. So what I'm going to do now is go to a clip that I had in a presentation that I did on Stan Shaw. And in this clip, this is not Billy playing Vivian Stanshall. This is Victor. Now, as I've mentioned, Victor is an actor and a musician that Billy put on his payroll so that Billy's McCartney and Stanshall character could coexist. In other words, so that he wouldn't run into the Batman and Bruce Wayne predicament, where they were never in the same room at the same time. So this is Victor playing Stanshall, but I want you to pay attention, and I have the captions, to what he says at the end of this clip. So let me play that now.
Do you like riddles? Conograms, anagrams, acronyms, teasers, they all are. I'm easy to bend, I begin where I end. I'm soft and I'm pink and I'm shy. I'm legless and armless and hairless and harmless. I'll give you 3 guesses. Who am I?
They search for the self, the psyche, the soul, the id and alter ego. God loves sheep, and nudis, verdis, per obscurum, obscurius.
The answer is a word. I have 2 guesses left.
Keep them by me. There are some things
I like things. Horace. He donated his head to the family.
Oh.
Okay, so we see Victor say Horace. He donated his head to the family.
Yep.
When I took a look at this after you discovered that he's blind in one eye, and if this was the result of ritual abuse, which we think it could have been, then we could change this line from the movie, Horace, he donated his eye to the family.
Right.
As part of all of this ritual occult stuff. And I know a lot of people have a hard time getting their arms around all of this occultism and this ritual stuff, but it's there and it exists. And so that leads me to my last slide. What they're doing, and this is spelled out in the 2021 version of Memoirs. Now, Tom just released an update to the book, right, Sally?
Right.
I think it's today.
Yes.
Today's October 20th, 2022, and Tom mentioned that there's going to be more information on the Eon of Horus, more information that has to do with, well, I should say more encoding that has to do with numbers and gematria. So the book keeps getting, I think, a little more complex, a little more layered, a little more sophisticated as it goes along, but with that, when you decode it, you get a lot more information. You get closer to the truth. What I want to leave you with, folks, is the way this is playing out. Biological Paul was Osiris, and Billy is Horus. And when we put Paul and Billy together, it's the Osiris-Horus ritual. And that is a big piece of what the controllers believe is going to lead to Crowley's Eon of Horus. And I know for a lot of you, you're probably scratching your head right now thinking this just sounds crazy. Well, but the thing we have to understand about the controllers is they are deeply, deeply embedded in the Egyptian mysteries. They are deeply embedded in occultism. And Sally, I'm going to give my opinion, and you tell me if you agree or if you don't agree. But I believe what's going on is they are imposing their spiritual belief system, their ideology on the world. And I look at them as Egyptian mystery fundamentalists, religious zealots in a way. And they're playing out events in the world, not just the Beatles and not just with biological Paul McCartney and Billy, but in all of these psychological operations that we see taking place, all these false flags and so on. They're all embedded with symbolism. They're all embedded with numbers. What are your thoughts?
No, you're absolutely right. Absolutely. They're all connected. The gematria is just that goes all the way back to Babylon.
Yeah.
And how they learned how to take phrases and put them into math. You think about the Bible, there's a book of Numbers, and there's also Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, math you. And if you look at that picture that you have, that's the eye that tells you that there's a footnote in Memoirs. That's the right eye, folks.
Exactly.
And if you look at the picture of Horus, first of all, it's a black bird, and that's his left eye that sees.
Right. And look at the similarities between the eye of Horus on the right-hand side and the left eye that we know of as Paul McCartney's eye. And the reason why I have Paul in the middle in the Jesus pose is because the controllers, they are putting the Paul McCartney character forward as a graven Christ figure. They believe this is what's going to lead us into the new one world religion.
Right.
And again, I know it sounds crazy. It sounds crazy to me.
Yeah, his sacrifice was the magic that propelled all of this forward.
Right. And that's what started the ritual, the ceremony, whatever it is that they call it, going back to Egypt between Osiris and Horus. And so biological Paul McCartney has the Osiris role and Billy has the Horus role. And they are looking to, and they would probably argue and say that they have already succeeded in a big part of making the Beatles, and specifically Paul McCartney, a Messiah type of character. And all we need to do is take a look at all the worship all around the Beatles and Paul McCartney, and you can make a case, I think a strong case, that that's exactly what people are doing. The Beatles and Paul McCartney are gods to people.
Right. And the Paulism that he mentions in Memoirs, it's based upon Paul.
Exactly. It's a Luciferian sect. It's based in the tenets of Thelema. I explained in one show, Sally, that when people say that Luciferianism doesn't have a holy text, or it doesn't have a scriptures, if you will, well, it does actually. It's the book of the law, Crowley's book of the law, and it's the religion of Thelema. That's what I have concluded. I guess we'll conclude with that. I know, folks, it's a little hard to get your head wrapped around, but we will do more work in upcoming presentations to try to make as much sense of it as we possibly can. There's a lot of very, very deep occulted stuff going on, very deep, with the controllers and what's taking place in the world. And the more you understand it, the more you'll have a better understanding of how the world really works.
And maybe not accepting it. If you don't know what you're looking at, it's pretty hard to fight against it.
That's right. If you don't know their signs and symbols, because that's how they communicate. What's the old saying, right? Signs and symbols rule the world, not words or laws. So many people look at words and laws, but they have no knowledge at all. They're ignorant to the signs and symbols, and that puts you at an immediate disadvantage, a very, very significant disadvantage if you don't start to understand some of this stuff. There's one other thing, though. You also sent Matthew 6:22 over. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. And that's from the King James Version. Very interesting. The light of the body is the eye. And if the eye is single, one eye, the whole body shall be full of light.
You know, growing up, my siblings would always say, "How did you see that?" I'd go, "I don't see double." And they would just laugh. But sometimes you're more aware with one eye. I can't even explain it, but I caught it and nobody else did. You know, as the kid's expression is, takes one to know one, I guess. But I knew what I was looking at, and there is some kind of energy between that man and me. I don't even understand it. Is there one more thing that I can say?
Yeah.
Okay, you gave me several days option of when to do the show, and I specifically picked this day because it's my birthday. I wanted to give a gift to William. We're trying to tell a story, and we're trying to give him his name back before he dies. And that's what I wanted to leave it as. All
right, Sally. So again, I want to thank you so much for all the work you've done, and we'll get this out there, and I think it's going to be a shock to so many people.
Now these other stories from the Contemporary News Desk. Well, the Beatles are still a quartet. Rumors for the past few days that Paul McCartney was dead came to a head yesterday. The problem became so bad that McCartney had to release a statement showing he was alive and well. McCartney said, "If I were dead, I'd be the last to know."
Hey everybody, it's Mike, and Sally is with us, and we're going to take a look back to October of 2022 when Sally first presented her discovery that Billy is blind in his right eye, and he has an artificial eye. And I asked Sally to come back and just to talk about it a little bit after about a year, and then we're going to talk a bit about Pan, and then we'll discuss Frankenstein. Frankenstein ties into the conspiracy as well. So, Sally, welcome back.
Thank you. I hope everybody has recovered the last time I was here. I mean, that was a lot for people to take in, but I mean, once you've seen it, like we talked about, you know.
Well, we knew it was going to be a tough pill for some people to swallow because it's something that, Billy's been in the picture for almost 60 years now, and nobody else picked up on it.
Well, you were close. You were really, really close with the drifting eye thing. And I think you would have caught it, to be perfectly honest with you, if you understood artificial eyes and how they work.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Going back to 2019, when I did this Stanshall presentation, I noticed the wandering eye that Billy has, or at least I thought it was a wandering eye, an eye that drifted a little bit. And that's how I was able to tie him back to the Stanshall character. But like you said, Sally, I just didn't have the knowledge with regard to artificial eyes to make that determination. So
it took somebody with one to know what they were looking at.
Right.
And it took me, 60 years to figure it out. I've had artificial eyes since I was like 6. That's when my eye was removed, and I was too busy making eye contact when I watched interviews with him. I was like my good eye with his good eye. It was only when I looked over the other side that I went, wait a minute, what's going on over there?
And we'll get into that because his eye, when it doesn't sync up, when his right eye doesn't sync up with his left eye, it's very subtle. And I've tried to make this point in a number of presentations and interviews, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand the word subtle. They're thinking that he's going to look like Marty Feldman now,
God,
with his eyes all over the place, and I've commented a couple of times in the comment section to try to, set the expectation level where it needs to be, that it is subtle, and many times when you look at Billy, his eyes are going to move together and they're going to be in sync, and it's going to look quite normal. But there are other times when you're going to look at images or you're going to look at video and you're going to see that there is something off, So and we'll get more into that. We spoke yesterday and you said, after I asked you the question, how confident are you a year later that Billy's right eye is artificial, that he's blind in his right eye? And you said, well, 99%. And I asked you, what's keeping you from getting to the 100% threshold? And you said, well, because I can't physically be there with him and tap on his eye. Right?
And I've actually done that. I've had talk to people and go, no, I have an artificial eye. And they go, no way. And I'd have to reach up and tap it with my fingernail. And they go, with their mouth hanging open. So I can't do that with Bill. But my experience is having an artificial eye all in my life, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah. Once you showed me what to look for, I can see it.
Yeah.
Like I said, folks, you're not going to see it all the time. What I have to do sometimes is, if I'm watching a video, I have to slow it down.
Yeah.
And capture it that way. If you're going at normal speed, sometimes it's going to be very difficult to pick up because, things are moving quickly.
Somebody made a video showing him in concert. And if you slow it down and you frame by frame, you can see. It's not blatant, but you can see that they're not completely in sync with each other.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that you have an artificial eye or an ocular prosthetic. And when we spoke yesterday, you said that you had your eye removed back when you were about 4 or 5 years old, and it was due to a parasite.
I got diagnosed with that right around the time they took it out when I was 6.
Okay.
Apparently what happened, and, I remember, bits and pieces of it, and my parents have kind of filled me in and stuff like that. It was a really long time ago. But I think what started this whole thing, and I told you this story yesterday, is that I was born with these really long eyelashes, crazy wild eyelashes, and people used to stop my family and talk about those eyelashes and stuff. And people would say things like, a lot of men are going to kill themselves over you, and you're going to break a lot of hearts. And it went on and went on and went on, and I got really tired of it because then my parents started calling me cow eyes.
Because of the long lashes?
Yeah, because of my long lashes. eyelashes. And out of anger of just constantly being given a hard time about my long eyelashes, I went into the bathroom. I can't believe it did this, but I went into the bathroom and cut my eyelashes off. And eyelashes protect from things getting in the eyes.
Yeah.
So that could have been what led to the parasite getting in my eye. But I used to take my nap out in the front yard, and this really did happen. The neighbors' pets would come and take their nap with me, and there was this one cat that used to lay across my neck. We didn't even own a cat at the time. And anyway, I think I got it from him. I guess that was around 4. Sometime after that, I started complaining to my mom that my eye hurt. And, you know, she had 5 kids, all born within a year of each other, less than a year of each other. So I knew she had her hands full, but she would look in my eye and not see anything. Anyway, this went on for quite a while, and I developed where I started sleepwalking at night. But one day I was outside, and my mom came to check on me, and the sunlight was reflecting my left eye like an animal when the headlights hit it at night.
Yeah.
And my mom saw that and realized there's something wrong with my daughter. So they took me to 3 different physicians who all diagnosed me with a brain tumor. And there was one doctor that my mom had heard about, because I just remember days and days of her just crying her eyes out, thinking I was going to die. And she heard about this one physician, and his name was Milton Bunyak. I don't even know if he's still alive, but she took me to him. He took one look at me and said, "She does not have a brain tumor. That is a parasite." She got that from a cat, and which was really unusual, like I said, when you even have a cat. Anyway, they tried to remove the parasite in 3 different surgeries, and they couldn't do it. And the 4th one, they removed my eye. And it was a long recovery time. They had to do different things. I mean, there was rehabilitation. There was getting used to an artificial eye. There was, you had to heal from the whole thing.
Well, it's amazing that that doctor knew about a parasite.
Thank God he did. And my oculist, he was very famous. He passed away a few years ago. His name was George Constance. He was there overseeing the physician as they removed the eye. He was telling them where to cut and all that kind of stuff to be able to save the socket as much as they could. Being able to fit it for an artificial eye and to be able to, for it to have as much movement as it is.
So it's an implant they put into your eye socket?
Yes, they did. They took the eye out, and then they made a slit. They put an implant in there. When you get to a certain age, say around 25, when everything stops growing and shifting and moving around and all that kind of stuff, I was supposed to have the implant that was put in there as a child taken out and a bigger one put in to allow better movement and all that kind of stuff. About 40, I went to go get my eye polished. You have to have it done about every 6 months or so. You have to have it literally polished, because any foreign object in your body will try to reject, and it will wear and tear on that eye. And for it to be able to move around as well as you want it to, if it has no polish on it, it won't move around and it'll stick. And, that could be some of the problems that you see with Bill. But anyway, you have to have a maintenance done to it. That's pretty much what I've done all my life. We talked about whether or not we've seen Bill driving a car.
Yeah, we talked about that yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, there are a certain amount of people that with only one eye cannot drive. They can't see distances. They can't judge, and I have problems still. If I park in a parking lot, most of the time I'll park away from all the cars, because it's really hard for me to judge distances and widths and all that kind of stuff. There are things that happen to you when you only see on one side of your face. You can't judge like curves. I've bit my tongue so many times not being able to judge, the distance of stepping off a curve, that type of stuff.
I mentioned yesterday that the only video that I am aware of, now that doesn't mean that there aren't others, where we see Billy driving is when he's driving, I believe it's his Jeep or his Land Rover, and I believe he's on his farm, and he's talking about how he joined the Beatles as an already set up affair, which means that he joined them after the fact. That's a different discussion, right? But my point is that is the only time that I've seen him actually driving in a vehicle.
Mm-hmm. We've seen pictures of him riding the subway. We've seen him pictures being driven everywhere. His wife driving him around, but I don't recall seeing any pictures where he climbed out of a car where he was driving.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course some people will say, well, he doesn't have to drive because he's so wealthy that, he has a driver and all that stuff. And that's fair enough, but you would think that even wealthy people drive cars, right? And you would think that there would be a lot more images or a lot more video of him driving if he was actively driving a car. So anyway, I'm just putting that out there. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be nice if people could send, if they found some stuff, that we could send it. But I was just thinking about that the other day. I went, wait a minute, I've never seen him. And some people with one eye can drive fine, and I drive fine. But again, like I said, there's places I park and things that I can't judge and all that kind of stuff. So there are people that have one eye that they simply can't drive.
Yeah.
And whether or not that's him,
we don't know.
We don't know, but I really have not seen any video of him driving.
Yeah. Now, I know you know this because you and I have had other discussions about this, but periodically comments will come in, and some people are under the impression that artificial eyes do not move. I have actually responded by putting a link to an ocular medical facility or a doctor that works with artificial eyes, and it's very clear that artificial eyes do move. Mm-hmm. There are situations, I guess, where if there's a lot of damage to the eye, where eye movement can be limited or maybe not move at all. But that's not the common situation with an artificial eye. Most of the time, the majority of the time, if somebody loses an eye and they have an artificial eye put in, that they will have movement, and that movement will correlate fairly well with the eye that has sight. So I just wanted you to comment on that, because I know that you've seen the same types of comments where some people think that artificial eyes don't move.
Well, that's the whole point of the ocularist, is that they're trying to tweak it to where it looks so much like the other one, and then it moves so much like the other one. They will, we talked about this in the first presentation about, there's an expression amongst ocularists, it's called lifting the lid. And they're trying to get that lid as lifted as much, and you can see it in Bill, and they try really hard to make it to where that your eyes are completely closed when you sleep. So they tweak that thing, and they try, and they'll go, okay, close, and whether or not your eyelid completely closes. When they first make the artificial eye, they're painstakingly paint just exactly like the other one. And then they just constantly tweak it, trying to get it to where it will move. And they will actually add, wax on the inside. They'll do things. They'll go, oh, okay. I mean, the last time I had one fitted, she would come in, she'd pop it in there, and she'd look at it, and she'd go, okay, we'll look to the right, look to the left, look up, look down, and then she would take the eye back out and make little X's and different things, and then go into her working thing, and then put places where it needs to be built up, where it needs to be lessened a little bit, and then pop it back in and see, okay, now move to the right.
So they're able to fine-tune.
Yes.
When you talk about Billy's eyelid, you're talking about the top lid protrudes out a little bit more because the eyelid is over the artificial eye.
Yeah, it's a hard plastic thing that's just sticking the lid straight up. Sometimes if you don't have polish on it, it can actually develop sharp edges on it and cut the inside of your socket. It's very painful. Sometimes they have to take it out to go get it worked on because it's doing that, and they have to have somebody drive them, and they can't drive anymore. It completely messes them up. Now, I've walked in the door of my oculist with my artificial eye in my pocket, You know, and he just thought it was funny that I've adjusted so well that it doesn't bother me if I take it out and drive. It doesn't bother me if I do this, do that. You know, it's just one of those things that I just happen to adjust to really well. I think I would have adjusted a whole lot worse if I'd lost my right eye as opposed to the left.
Because you're right-handed?
Because I'm right-handed. And this goes back to Bill, because he's right-handed. And he can't see on his right side. I imagine that is just, I don't even know how he lifts that right eyebrow, because I can't.
Yeah, well, he said in the book that took a lot of practice to be able to train the muscles of the right side of his face to lift the eyebrow, to give it that McCartney arch. Sally, I wanted to ask you now, in your case, you had an implant put in, right? Which means the entire eye came out and
Yep.
An implant was put in. And even with your implant, you have motion.
I have great movement, yeah.
And with Billy, as I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion here, to detect his artificial eye, it takes some work. It takes some analysis because he has very good movement most of the time. So do you think that Billy has an implant, or do you think that the damage to his eye was less?
In that eye presentation that we did before, there were two categories. One was, complete eye removal with the implant, and the other one was it could be an artificial eye placed upon a real eye that's been very, very damaged. In my opinion, I could be wrong about this because I don't know the guy, but my opinion is that he's got a real eye that's in there, and it's been so damaged that they put the artificial eye over the top of it. And that would give him lots and lots of movement because the damaged eye is still attached.
Right. There's no implant.
Right. So, whoever is saying this, they're speaking out of ignorance. I know that somebody sent me a message one time that said they didn't think that Billy has an artificial eye because he couldn't see it, and then he sent me a picture of himself. And he did tell me that he was shot.
Okay, so hold on. So somebody who has an artificial eye contacted you and sent an image of themselves?
Yeah, sent a picture of themselves, and it was like, so I mean, I feel bad that you lost your eye, but there's no comparison between the two of these. Bill, no doubt, whatever they did to him, it was under medical supervision, the same thing they did with me, and whatever has been done to him, they know exactly how to cover it up. And I think the whole point was having to do with Horus and Odin. And
yeah, it's crazy how this ties back to mythology. It's really very, very strange. Now, I'm gathering from what you're saying that you do not believe that Billy's loss of sight in his right eye was an accident.
No.
Okay.
They did this to him. I think this was part of that whole torture thing. I think it goes back to 3 years old. And at 3 years old, he even had a greater advantage than me. And I think this is why he doesn't wear reading glasses. Page 309, where he talks about he doesn't need a reading glass.
Yeah, let me read it. It's a whisper message. It says that William says eye yoga kept him from needing a reading glass. So singular, not plural.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he had two functioning eyes, he would need glasses, right?
Yep.
Now, in the book, it tells us that Billy was subjected to trauma-based programs, and his earliest recollection goes back to when he was 3 years old. And when we spoke yesterday, Sally, I mentioned that I was watching a documentary that had nothing to do with the Beatles or Billy or any of that stuff. It had to do with mind control programs and ritual abuse. And I was watching this about a month ago or so. And it was a documentary, and it mentioned that the way these programs work and this ritual abuse works, it starts at age 3, typically. And I found that interesting because this is a completely different source, stating that the age of 3 is a key moment in time when these programs really kick in. And we have Billy, through Tom, telling us in the book that his earliest memory of being in a program goes back to the age of 3. So is it coincidence? I don't know. Perhaps that's exactly how it works.
Yeah, I think they decided that at 3 years old is when the brain of a child has the ability to split. And so they do horrible things to these kids
Yeah.
to make their psyche split into several different personalities.
So you don't think there's any way that he lost sight in his right eye later in life, that you believe it was when he was a kid?
Yeah, he could have been born with that, that could have been a sign that he was supposed to be meant for greatness.
But it didn't happen when he was 20 or 30 or...
No, I don't think so. But really, I don't think so because of the way that he handles it so well. And if you read about one-eyed people, it talks about when things happen to them as a child, it's a whole lot easier for them to adjust than for it to happen as an adult. And I heard some people recently talking about how they were sure that Billy poked his eye out on his own. It was like, what the heck? As long as it took me to recover from that whole situation, it would have taken him a really, really long time for him to recover from something like that as an adult.
Yeah, because there's an acclimation process, right? I think people who have two eyes take that for granted, but I would think that the acclimation process would be a lot more difficult and take longer if you lost an eye as an adult versus when you're a child.
Mm-hmm. And there's a really interesting little phenomenon with me is I can hear better out of my left ear than my right.
Oh, really?
Think about that.
Yeah.
No sight.
There's another point I wanted to make. You mentioned we talked about eyeglasses. In memoirs, it mentions in the current edition, I have the 2023 book, and I forgot all about this, Sally, and I really don't know how I missed it. Biological Paul used to wear glasses,
Mm-hmm.
and there are many images where he's wearing them.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to ask ourselves, when did we ever see Billy wearing glasses, except when he does his Buddy Holly impersonation? Right?
Yeah.
Right? Other than that,
talk to Vicky about Buddy Holly. She's been working on this Frankenstein stuff. She's been like, it took her a while to go, I'm not getting this. And then I explained it to her. And then she started looking into the Illuminati stuff. And she was like, oh, my God, you're right about this.
yeah, when you first mentioned it, I was like, a Frankenstein connection? And we're going to talk about it. Now, I didn't discount it because I've learned a long time ago, don't discount anything. You just don't know. There's so much weirdness out there in this reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you just take something, just throw it overboard immediately, you could be missing a big piece to the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
So my advice is not to do that. Now, what I want to talk to you about is, since your discovery and the presentation that we did when you came on the show back last October, there have been some what I'll call proof points, some evidence that has emerged that validates your discovery. And one of them is the Pudsey photo, where Billy is posing with Pudsey the bear. Now, for those of you who didn't watch my recent presentation, Pudsey is the official logo of Children in Need. And Children in Need is the BBC's UK charity. And I'll read from the chart that I presented back a couple of months ago. Since 1980, it has raised over $1.5 billion for disadvantaged children and young people in the UK. And then I asked the question, but aside from Billy promoting Children in Need, is he giving us a hidden clue about himself? So, and you'll see this image, folks, in the presentation, because I'm going to put it into the slideshow. So we have Billy standing with Pudsey the bear, who is a mascot for Children in Need. And then I asked the question, aside from Billy promoting the charity, is he also giving us a hidden clue about himself? And Pudsey has a patch over his right eye. And you have concluded, Sally, that Billy is blind in his right eye. And in the image, Pudsey's wearing Billy's Sgt. Pepper outfit. And behind Billy, his left shoulder, is a mushroom from Alice in Wonderland. And we know that he and John Lennon, in particular, were very fond of Carol Lewis's work.
Mm-hmm.
So when I looked at that image, I took the name Pudsey and ran it through my numerology calculator, Pythagorean numerology, and Pudsey equals 9. And we know that 9 is also the number associated with Billy when he plays his McCartney role. And as I mentioned, Pudsey has a patch over his right eye, and Billy is blind in his right eye, and Pudsey's wearing Billy's Sgt. Pepper costume. So we have to ask ourselves, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
Is Pudsey a representation of Billy? Is Billy telling us something about himself?
Yeah. And a really interesting side note is that Pan was always associated with bears, and he did Rooper the Bear.
Right.
And he's also associated with wolves. And if you watch any of Bill's concerts, in between songs, he's always going, ow, ow, ow.
Right.
Like a wolf.
Right. Which, by the way, I never heard Paul McCartney do.
Yeah.
Think about that, folks. Okay.
There's one thing about the glasses thing, going back to that, is that when you lose something, nature has a way of taking care of it. And if you look at a guy that's in a wheelchair, his arms are really built up, right? So nature has a way of picking up. And you lose one eye when you're a little kid, and the one that's still working winds up being superior eyesight. The eye grows really, really strong. I used to take a lot of vacations with my family, and we would always play that alphabet game where you go through the alphabet with signs and license plates and all this different stuff. And it got to the point that my brothers and sisters would say, well, we'll play if Sal doesn't play. And that was my nickname growing up. I could see the letters before they could barely make out that it was a billboard. My sight was just incredible. I could outshoot anybody I knew. I could outplay them in pool. All those different things that you normally kind of close one eye for.
Yeah.
I was really, really good at it. And you go back to Bill, he learned the eye yoga, and I think that's one of the reasons that he's, 85 years old, and he doesn't wear reading glasses. I think that's because he only has one eye.
And if we go back to Pudsey for a moment, I believe it's possible that what Billy's telling us that as a child, he was also a child in need.
Yeah.
As a result of trauma-based programs, which we're told about in memoirs, and that perhaps the loss of his eyesight was a result of what you talked about before, some type of ritual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's horrible to think about. And the one last thing I wanted to mention, and I don't want to belabor this, but Pudsey has red feet. And when I did the presentation, I asked my audience to comment on what they think the red shoes may mean, or his red feet might mean. And a lot of people came back and talked about the Red Shoe Club and how that's tied to ritual abuse. So that was duly noted, but also, I also said in the presentation that red is also representative of fire, which is associated with the sun, and the sun goes back to Egypt, which goes back to Ra and Horus. So we also need to, I think, balance the scales here, because it may not mean ritual abuse. It could, but it also may not mean that.
Yeah, red is always associated with Mars, and Mars is a connection in all of this when you go back to Rome.
Right.
So I guess it's everybody's interpretation.
Yes, that's the thing. Everybody has their leanings, but I think in all fairness, we have to lay out a number of scenarios. Now, the other proof point that we got was Billy masterfully speaking at the Eyes of the Storm Gallery, where he was being interviewed. I think it was CBS, and the interviewer was going through the gallery with him, and they were looking at this one particular photo. And toward the end of the discussion, the person who's interviewing Billy says, well, you really have to have an eye to take that photo. And then Billy clicks his heel down on the floor and says, yes, it's my left eye.
Yeah.
And I'll play that for the audience, Sally, so they can take a look at that clip if they hadn't seen it already. Also in that clip, Billy says, I really like the architecture. And that was a reference to Freemasonry. And if you look at the architecture on the building, and I'll put the video in the presentation, just pause it there and you'll see that the architecture are hexagons, 6-sided. But what Billy was pointing back to was Freemasonry, because we know in Freemasonry we have the Grand Architect, right? So that's what I think he was doing. I think he was pointing back to his secret society roots, if you will.
Oh, and that guy that was interviewing him said you really have to have an eye for this. The whole thing was called the Eyes of the Storm, and normally the expression is Eye of the Storm. So he called it Eyes of the Storm, and I can't help think that he's referring back to Paul, who supposedly took the pictures, and he had two eyes.
Right. Good point.
This picture was when we were arriving at, I think it was the Deauville Hotel in Miami.
I think your quote in the book was, I can almost hear her scream.
Yeah, you can. The cops got to restrain her, you know.
Well, I also love the cop in the foreground who just sort of looks puzzled by everything.
I know.
Yeah.
I like the architecture.
So do I.
Of that
I actually
hotel.
love it.
But, you know, as we were saying before, that had to be taken really quickly.
Yeah.
She had to snap that.
Yeah. But you have to have an eye to take that.
It's my left one.
But you have to have an eye to take that. It's my left one.
But you have to have an eye to take that.
It's my left one.
But you have to have an eye to take that. It's my left one.
Another proof point is Memoirs has been updated with one whisper message and two footnotes that validate your discovery. So we talked about the whisper message on page 309, and again, let me put my readers on so I can read this. It says, William says eye yoga kept him from needing a reading glass. And as I mentioned before, singular versus eyeglasses, which would be plural, the word glass versus glasses. But then there's a very interesting footnote on page 160. Let me read that real quick. So in the footnote, Tom says, cover art for With the Beatles and Meet the Beatles used shadows to conceal the left eye of each emissary of the New Age, and the emissaries would be the Beatles. Now, celebrities represent the eye of Ra, which is the right eye or the sun, or the eye of Horus, which is the left eye or the moon, by concealing one, usually with a palm, or are sometimes compelled to publicly show one eye darkened by bruising. It changes how they are seen and how they see. With the right eye of Bill given to Horus, his left eye sees what is left. So that's masterfully speaking, which is what Billy was doing back in the gallery when the interviewer said, well, it takes an eye to take that type of picture, and Billy said, yes, it's my left eye. So that's masterfully speaking. And folks, on page 294, and again, I'm using the 2023 edition of Memoirs. So if you have an older edition, some of these footnotes may not be in there. So at the very bottom of page 294, Tom says, although Thoth restored the eye that Set destroyed, now an ocular prosthesis would suffice. So that's the second footnote, Sally, that validates your discovery. So when you read that, what did you think to yourself?
When I spoke to Tom the first time about the eye, he wrote back and goes, well, it looks real to me. And it was like, okay, I'm not going to say anything else. I'm just going to grab some more evidence. And I went to bed that night thinking about what he said. And right before I fell asleep, I jolted awake and I went, he didn't answer the question.
Right.
He masterfully just spoke to me and I fell for it. Anyway, he basically said, it looks real to me. Well, he didn't answer the question. Of course it looks real to him. It's supposed to look real. Anyway, that's when I went looking for more stuff and then confirmed it. And then when he finally confirmed it, I was really worried about whether or not this was going to embarrass, I guess I shouldn't have, but it was like, I know what it feels like for me. I'm very sensitive about the subject. So, I was just real cautious about whether or not we were going to release this.
Well, you wanted to be respectful, right? And the way I've explained it, I've relayed the story, I think in 2 interviews. When you pressed Tom a little bit more, when I say pressed, I mean you basically presented more evidence that you believed that he did have an artificial eye. Tom, and I'm going to paraphrase here, Sally, so just correct me where I don't get it right. But essentially what he said was, okay, fine, just be gentle with how you present this.
Yes, and then when I told him, do you know how many times people used to call me Cyclops Sally in school? And he goes, oh my God, I can't believe they did that to you. And I went, yeah, I think I can be gentle. If there's one person who can be gentle about this, it would be somebody who's experienced it. And yeah, I can. I told him, I said, I still haven't heard from you whether or not, we can release this. And he goes, hold on a minute, I want to send you something. And then he forwarded one of the notes, and it confirmed what I said, or what I believed. And I just cried. He was like, oh my God, I knew I was right about this, so I was an emotional basket case for a few days.
Well, he wasn't giving you permission in a sense, right? You wanted to be respectful of the situation. Is that right?
Yeah. And then he sent me the footnote from the memoirs that was coming out, specifically, saying his right eye was given to Horace. That was his way of saying, it's okay, I know, I trust you, I know you're going to handle this gently.
When you do this work, even though you do want to reveal information, you also have to be respectful. Because, if you turn the tables and you thought, would you want somebody to do that to you?
Exactly.
You have to think of it in those terms. At the end of the day, whether you agree or disagree or you're indifferent with the roles that they're playing, they're still people.
Mm-hmm.
It's even like when I talk about the Beatles not writing all their own music or playing on all of the recorded tracks, I don't attack the Beatles. I don't ridicule them. It's because they were put into a situation. They were put into a role.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some folks might want to argue that they took on a role of deception. I get it. I understand it. But you also want to maintain a level of objectivity when you do this work, because as soon as you start getting very subjective and you start imposing your personal opinions into the work, then it's really not objective research anymore. Then it starts to become an agenda.
Yeah.
It becomes dogma and all that stuff, So in any case, I'm going off here on a tangent.
Well, and proof is in the pudding. I handled this, we try to handle this as respectful as possible, and look at the results that we're getting. I mean, he's sending all kinds of stuff.
Right.
The Pudsey Bear is just one tiny thing he did. He, put out a picture with him, and you can include that in there with the 3 puppies.
With the puppies, yeah.
Yeah. He even posted that they adopted a new dog, and they called it Jet.
Yeah.
And in the first presentation, I had a horse named Jet that I talked about, because the fact that we handled this so respectful to him. I talked to Tom, and he goes, well, you don't give off an air of condemnation to him.
Right.
And it's a whole lot easier to go somewhere where you're welcome. So he's throwing information our way.
Yeah, I agree. If you're going to be in attack mode and you're going to be nasty, then, there's a lot of things that won't come your way as far as information goes.
Yeah. Vicki and I talked about this, is that if you're open-minded to it, the universe is constantly throwing you stuff.
Right.
Through synchronicities and stuff, just to show you that you're on the right path.
Right. And folks, the image of Billy holding the 3 puppies, the puppy on the right, on his right-hand side, on our left, has the same features as Pudsey. The puppy has a mask masking the right side of his face, so it's essentially the same image as Pudsey.
Mm-hmm.
What is he communicating? Now, some people, I'm sure, are sitting there going, oh, you guys are connecting dots that are not there. This is just coincidental. And, and you and I talked about this yesterday, Sally. How many coincidences do you need before you realize it's not a coincidence anymore?
Well, if you study Manly P. Hall, he talks about that there's some people with alchemy. I've been studying all these guys because of the Illuminati and all that kind of stuff and everything that's led up to this. They will talk about, some people just don't have the eye to see it.
Yeah. I realize that there are segments of the population that no matter what you show them, no matter how many dots you connect, they won't see it. And they won't see it for a number of reasons. One will be because they don't want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Other times, they literally cannot see it. They cannot discern, which is mind-boggling to me, but I have done this long enough to realize that segment of the population is out there. They cannot connect dots.
Oh my God, they walk around with masks, and how many boosters have they taken so far?
Right.
I mean, you're going to have a whole bunch of people that are just like...
Now, Sally, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other images you sent over. Now, there's another one I'm looking at it now. We have Billy. He's in a white T-shirt. He's got a notepad in his hand, and he's kind of staring off to his left, our right, and he's looking pensive. And here you can see where the right eye and the left eye are not synced up.
Yep. And why did he release that picture? That picture just came out recently. I don't know who's, in charge of his publicity and all that kind of stuff, but they're conveying a message from him.
Yeah, and what I'll do is, in the presentation when I release the interview, is I'll mask off the left and right hand side of his face like I've done before, and you'll see that his right eye is looking pretty much straight ahead, and his left eye is looking more to his left. And this is something that I have seen, Sally, whenever he looks hard left, is what I've noticed, is when I see his right eye not tracking exactly with his left eye. That's my own personal observation. And I know you have said that you can see it a lot in concert footage.
Oh, yeah. And some of that probably is because he's moving around and he's sweating. And not only can you get air pockets between his eye and his artificial eye, but he's getting tears in there, he's getting sweat in there, so he's having to reach up periodically and adjust it. So that's the best way to see any of this stuff, is to just watch him in concert.
You can see it more often in concert footage. And the other thing, Sally, you pointed out is that a lot of times when he's playing, he positions himself with the microphone so that his left eye can see.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, he doesn't position himself with the microphone where his right eye would be dominant. Yes?
Yeah, you can see him in music videos and everything. He's always turning his head to the left because he can see. He doesn't turn his head as much to the right, just like the footage that we saw before, where we thought it was just because he was right-handed that he was adjusting to playing left-handed. Like, nope, there's even another aspect to that, is that he can't see on the right side, so he has to turn his head that way to be able to see the fretboard.
Right. Now, I sent you another image. It was a screen capture from an interview that he did with John Lennon. I think it was at Apple back in 1968. I think it was the last interview they did. And this one caught my interest because, number one, I could see his right eyelid is protruding out. You mentioned this before, where the eyelid, the top of the eyelid sticks out a little bit more because of the artificial eye. But also in this image, I noticed a couple of things. One, it just looks like his right eye is not in alignment with his left eye. It's slightly off. But also, there's a glare at the very top of his right eye that I don't see with his left eye.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming that glare or whatever is from the cameras from the interview. So, I don't know. Do artificial eyes reflect back light like that?
They reflect back light a whole lot more than a real eye does. A real eye has the way of absorbing the light as opposed to reflecting it back. Because that's just a hard plastic, shiny thing. It's got tons of polish on it, and it reflects back.
Okay. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about with regard to the eye is the song Come Together. Now, I covered this in my presentation. He got Juju Eyeball. And for the longest time, before the discovery of the eye, I had no idea what Juju Eyeball meant. I would sing the song. In fact, I used to play the song when I had my band. When my sister got married, we played Come Together. And giving no thought whatsoever to Juju Eyeball. So, of course, the lyric is, he got Juju Eyeball, he won Holy Roller. That's another clue.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So let me just read this, Sally. I believe Come Together is a reference to his artificial eye. So we're told that Juju is an object that has been deliberately infused with magical power or the magical power itself. Juju operates on the principle of spiritual contagious contact based on physical contact. The underlying belief is that two entities, so we think in terms of Paul and Billy, that have been in close contact have similar properties even after being separated. So the separation would be Paul dying.
Mm-hmm.
it then becomes possible to manipulate one in order to reach the other. So, in other words, they are linked together. Thus, in that context, a person's hair, fingernails, a piece of clothing, a shoe, a sock, or a piece of jewelry worn by them are all perfect candidates for juju because they are believed to retain the spiritual aura of their owner. And what caught my attention with this, and by the way, folks, the source to this is Britannica.com. In Memoirs, we're told that when Billy met the McCartneys, and Jim McCartney specifically, there was clothing, a shoe, and a sock involved.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was interesting. So Britannica goes on to say, likewise, it is thought that spiritual similarity can be created by deliberately placing two things in physical contact. The underlying belief is that spiritual assimilation and fusion will take place with one entity absorbing the qualities of the other.
Oh, wow.
I think that that's what Juju Eyeball in the song Come Together was all about.
You know, it's really interesting because in Frankenstein, the first thing that happens is that he notices that the left eye pops open. That was the first sign that the thing was alive. And in Rime of the Ancient Mariner, he has a right eye that's sparkling and is like drawing or casting a spell on the person that he's telling the story to. Interesting connection.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And he's obviously doing spells. I mean, in Memoirs, he talks about that all of this stuff, magic, is nothing other than energy transference. And if you watch him in concert, he's casting spells, in my opinion. That's what he's doing.
Yeah, if you read the book, it becomes quite clear that Billy is, he's an occultist. That's my conclusion.
He changed the words, the magician's son, to the widow's son. That's one of the expressions that they call harem abith, is the widow's son.
Well, it also goes back to Isis, who lost Osiris.
Oh, yes, was a widow. Yeah.
And I covered that also, and credit to Wendy, because Wendy brought this to my attention. Isis was known as the great magician. So if he is in the role of Horus, then Isis is his mother. And so he would be the son of the great magician. So what I'll do is I'll put the link down to that presentation in the description box below, folks, because if I get into that again, this will go for another 3 hours.
I've been studying some other stuff, and Mary, over the years, has been actually a title. It's the equivalent in the priestesses, that it's the equivalent of father.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so Mary, at the time, was just a title, and a lot of people believe that Mary, the mother of Jesus, is a reincarnation of Isis. So I told Tom, I said, man, that sounds very similar for a greeting around Christmas time. They say Merry Christmas. It sounds very, very similar to Merry Isis. And he actually put that in the whispers.
Did he?
Yep, he sure did.
I haven't gotten through all of it yet. I'm about halfway through the 2023 edition. I told you yesterday I'm reading 3 books.
Yeah, he told me, he goes, there was something that you directly pointed out to me that is included in Memoirs. I'm looking forward to when you find it. You couldn't point me in the direction.
Yeah.
And I found it. I was pretty excited when I did.
Yeah, well, he talks about Mother Mary comes to me and let it be as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what he's talking about. I'm totally convinced he's talking about that Mother Mary religion.
All right, so I think that's all I have on his eye, Sally. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we touch on Pan?
No, I don't think so. I think he's definitely communicating to us. I think he's so tired of all this bullshit. I mean, most of the time you see his face, he just looks like he's just completely aggravated with everything.
Well, he looks more and more like he's really going through the motions now to me.
Yep.
And the thing is, once you know the backstory and you understand the conspiracy, it's very, very easy to see what it is he's doing and what he's saying, at least for me.
Also, going back to, just real quick, we got a lot of the original eye presentation from that particular concert where he does in Mexico. Talking about that Mother Mary religion, he's singing Let It Be, and there's a split shot with Linda over his left shoulder, and she's always on his left shoulder because he can't see on his right. He wants to look over and see his wife. She's always placed there on his left. But the part in the song where he says, and this really broke my heart when I realized, he said, though they may be parted, the moment that he sings, they may be parted, watch Linda. She starts disappearing.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's that, I think it's in Lovely Lady chapter where he talks about that she was denied medical treatment for her cancer.
Yeah, in Memoirs, it talks about even though he's high up the ladder, evidently he's not high enough to be able to receive, or Linda was not able to receive, the cures for cancer. There's a hierarchy, as we know, within the pyramid, and even though I believe Billy's in the illuminated degrees, which means he has exceeded the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, evidently, even if you're in the illuminated degrees, and the book tells us there are 13 of those, it still doesn't mean that you have the golden key.
Yeah, and the Gematria 13 degrees lines up with William Shepard, all 4 numbers.
So there you go, folks. That's the piece on the eye, and I covered Pan in the last presentation. I talked about how Pan, the etymology of Pan goes to panic, pandemonium, pandemic, and I talked about how in ancient Greek religion and mythology, Pan is the god of the wild, shepherds and flocks, rustic music, and impromptus, and a companion of the nymphs. And we know that Billy has the song Mother Nature's Son, which I believe is talking to the Pan mythology.
Mm-hmm. One of the lines in that song where he said, all day long I'm singing songs to everyone, he's in the woods.
Right.
Who the heck is he singing to? That's a representation of Pan singing to nymphs and dryads and all that stuff that live in the forest.
Right. And in my presentation, I had mentioned that Pan has similarities to the Greek god Dionysus.
Oh, yes.
In Memoirs, it discusses the return to the cult of Dionysus, which would also be the cult of Pan.
Mm-hmm.
It's going back to paganism, folks. That's where it's going, and I've covered this many, many times. But Pan also is tied to the Pied Piper, which is a variation of the Pan story.
Mm-hmm.
I refer to the Beatles as the Pied Pipers of the Eon of Horus. And when we talk about pied clothing, we're talking about multicolored clothing. If we go to Sgt. Pepper, what are the Beatles wearing? Multicolored outfits. And we also have Peter Pan. And Peter Pan always brought me back to the Fool card in tarot.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to steal your thunder here. I'm just trying to cover a little bit of what I covered in my presentation. So what other aspects of Pan should we discuss?
Okay, there is a very significant overlap between Hermes, who is some believe to be the father of Pan, and Pan. I mean, there's so much overlap between the two. There's a real belief in some people, and I'm starting to lean towards that, is that Hermes is just simply an evolution of Pan. That they cleaned him up a little bit, and but he still has the now he has wings on his head as opposed to horns and stuff, but there's so much overlap between the two of them. And the nickname for both of them, they're both gods of nature and rustic and all that kind of stuff, is an expression that is used in both Hermes and Pan is Lord of the Pathways, and that's in that gematria that I sent you, and the 4 basic ciphers all line up with William Shepard. In fact, there's a really funny scene. I can send that over to you if you want to. It's just like 8 seconds long, where somebody's interviewing him, and she said, "What are some of your hobbies?" And he looks at her and he goes, "I like to make paths through the woods." Very masterfully speaking.
I like making paths through woods.
Well, Lord of the Pathways says that he's a shepherd.
Yeah.
And he's leading flocks.
Yes.
And that is one of the characteristics of Pan.
Yeah, exactly. And when he says it, then he kind of looks at her like, "Did you catch that reference?" It's very, very funny. But it's like, if you know what he's saying, he even says it in the documentary making of Flaming Pie, which at the beginning of that, and I should send you that too, he's being interviewed, he's sitting on a couch, and he goes, "That's when I was doing the McCartney thing."
Okay, send that over.
Yeah, and he looks at the camera for just a split second, then he goes right back to talking to them. And the first time I heard it, went, did he just say what I think he did? I listened to it 3 or 4 times, and yep, that's what he did.
When we first met, Linda and I, she said, I didn't know you played like heavy guitar like this, because I'd have an amp and an electric guitar at home, around about the time when I was doing McCartney. I'd be sitting around, just doing this kind of funky stuff. She said, I didn't have you figured for that. You know, she didn't know me that well personally.
I have an interview of him going back to last year where he said being knighted meant that he can herd flocks through the streets of London.
I think it was his daughter who looked it up and found that that's what he has a privilege to.
Yeah, he claimed his daughter asked him, right. His daughter said, hey, what does being a knight allow you to do? And he's just dropping clues every which way from Sunday.
Yeah. For people who are paying attention.
Thank you very much.
Woo!
Ooh, ooh.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Mark.
Sir Paul McCartney.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Now, being a knight.
Yeah.
What does that enable you to do? Like, can you go to the British Museum and take out armor?
No, but I can drive a herd of sheep through the city of London.
That really?
Yeah.
That's a real thing.
Well, what it is, they give you the freedom. It's slightly different. They give you the freedom of the city.
Yeah.
And my daughter, Stella, said, what is it? Did you get anything? I said, I don't know. I got to think. I don't know. So she looked it up.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, it is. I am entitled to drive a flock of sheep through the city of London.
I'm surprised Capitol didn't think of that for a publicity thing.
This time.
Hermes and Pan are so closely connected. Pan, or Hermes, did something really interesting, and I see how this ties into Os and all this kind of stuff. When he was born, he crawled out of his crib. The first thing he did when he left the cave that he was born in is that he saw a turtle, and he turned it into a lyre, L-Y-R-E. He is a liar, L-I-A-R. He's the trickster. Anyway, that evening, he steals the cattle of Apollo. He steals 50 of his cattle. And they can't figure out where he went because he walked backwards. He made the cattle walk backwards. Go back to Crowley, who wants you to write opposite hand, walk backwards. They even talk about Bill was very good about, I don't think he ever could run, but he was actually really good about walking backwards.
Yeah, that's Crowley's law of reversal.
Yeah.
Michael Jackson did the moonwalk, right?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up because Mercury retrograde figures into this as well because we keep coming across the references to Mercury. Mercury is Hermes. If Bill was born on the date that we think he was born on the date, Mercury was in retrograde at that time. When Paul was born, June the 18th, 1942.
You believe Billy was born on September 11th of 1937.
Yep, I sure do. It just keeps coming up. I mean, the universe just keeps throwing 9/11 at me. I could be wrong, but my gosh, how many times do you have to have that confirmation before you go, all right, I'm convinced? The whole oath thing, this is ancient Greek mythology.
Yeah.
And Hermes is doing this. But while he was driving the cattle, stealing them from Apollo, there was a guy that witnessed this whole thing. His name was Betos. And when Hermes realizes that this guy has seen it, he said, I require your silence over this. And this guy tells him, a nice little fee will keep my mouth shut. So he gives the guy the money, and he keeps driving the cattle. And then he stops, and he changes into a different outfit, and he comes back dressed completely different, and asks the guy, hey, have you seen anybody with some cattle? And the guy just immediately spills his guts. And Hermes reveals who he actually is, and kills the guy right there. Turns him into stone. So we've got these death oaths, right? So
yeah, or Freemasons refer to as their obligations, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, if you want to go back to where did all this start, got the feeling that that's where it all got started at. But what really started getting me looking into Pan is that I knew that Crowley was in it, that I saw that Vivian Stanshall doing the Urban Space Band, and he's dressed up like Apollo in that song. But at one point he takes the flute, whatever it is he's playing, recorder, and he sticks it up his nose like he's playing. And if you know the history of what happened between Hermes and Pan and Apollo, you would understand that skit. Because Pan, who's supposed to be the son of Hermes, and he challenged Apollo to a music contest. And King Midas was the only one that sided with Pan. So there's bad blood between Hermes, Pan, and Apollo.
Yeah, because Apollo won the contest.
Yes. And so if you look at that skit now, if he's, got the persona of Pan and he's throwing it in the face of Apollo, that's what got me really, really going, there's something to this.
Yeah, I'll include that clip in the presentation, Sally. As we're talking, I'll run it in the background. Yeah, so there's all of this, these ties back to mythology. It never seems to end, Anything else on Pan before we jump into Frankenstein?
Yeah, what happened in the 1600s was this real resurgence in Europe, real resurgence of this paganism religion. And by the 1700s, it had just taken off like wildfire. And Mary Shelley was born in 1797, so by the 1800s, and I was listening to a lecture a little while ago before you called, he was talking about in the 1800s is when there was a great surgence of Pan, and it lasted for 180 years. I can think, there's these numbers.
Yeah, 9, 1 plus 8.
Yeah.
And by the way, folks, Mary Shelley is the author of the novel Frankenstein.
Yep. And Percy and Mary Shelley were both devout followers of Pan. They got on this religious movement.
Well, Percy Shelley, Mary's husband, wrote the Hymn of Pan.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the hymn that Jack Parsons of Jet Propulsion Laboratory fame used to recite before any rocket launch. And Jack Parsons was a disciple of Aleister Crowley. And by the way, there's a book, Sally, that I ordered that hasn't come yet. I'm waiting for it. It's titled Aleister Crowley and the Cult of Pan.
Oh, wow.
So I'm waiting for that book to be delivered. It's delayed, but as soon as I get it, I'm going to read it, and I'll let you know how it goes. So there's a connection, clearly, of Crowley going back into the cult of Pan as well.
Yeah, at his funeral, they read, I think he wrote some poems to Pan, and they read his poem to Pan at his funeral.
Should we switch over to Frankenstein?
Sure.
Okay, so what I'm going to do for the audience, let me read a little bit here to give us a context, and then Sally will take us through Frankenstein. So Frankenstein, the title character in Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, and again, Mary's husband is Percy. Frankenstein is the prototypical mad scientist who creates a monster by which he is eventually killed. The name Frankenstein has become popular and attached to the creature itself, who has become one of the best-known monsters in the history of motion pictures. Shelley's novel, Frankenstein, or otherwise known as Martin Prometheus, that's interesting, is a combination of Gothic horror story and science fiction. The book tells the story of Victor Frankenstein, a Swiss student of natural science who creates an artificial man from pieces of corpses and brings this creature to life. Though it initially seeks affection, the monster inspires loathing in everyone who meets it. Lonely and miserable, the monster turns upon its creator, who eventually loses his life. As I just mentioned, the novel Frankenstein is also known as the Martin Prometheus, and I had a side note where Prometheus has been associated with Lucifer.
Mm-hmm.
And in Encyclopedia Britannica, it mentions that Frankenstein is a monster that torments its creator. So I was thinking about this. If Prometheus is associated with Lucifer, and Frankenstein is a monster that torments its creator, then are we talking about the fallen angels and Yahweh?
Yeah, he is like 8 foot tall.
The monster is.
Yeah. Creature. And they never give him a name either. Also, what you were talking about with the fire, with Prometheus, didn't Bill have an album called The Fireman?
Yes.
Yep. And as you pointed out, Frankenstein was released. The date reduces to 9/11.
Yes, so let's talk about that. So Frankenstein was released on January 1st, 1818. So if we look at the date, January 11th, January is 1, the day is 1, that's 11. 1818 is 9 and 9. 9 plus 9 is 18. 1 plus 8 equals 9. So the release date of the novel Frankenstein is encoded with 9/11.
Just amazing. And the book, the novel, starts on December 11th, and it ends essentially on 9/11 when Victor Frankenstein dies. So you're talking about from December 11th to the following September 11th. That's exactly 9 months. The entire book is either 9 or 9/11 encoded. And you've got these characters, right? You got William, who was murdered. There's Victor, who's the doctor. Elizabeth and Mary is, the writer of all this. Queen Elizabeth's middle name is Mary, and she died on the day that the Catholics celebrate the birthday of Mary, Mother of Jesus.
Okay, I didn't know any of that.
Yep, very interesting connections. And, so you've got William and Victor. On page 86 of Memoirs in the Whispers, it says that Victor was 86th. So you got this theme running all the way through, and Victor goes to the University of Ingolstadt, and he does it when he's like 17 and a half years old, so that would put him at his 18th year. Adam Weishaupt, who's the one who founded the Illuminati.
Yeah, the Bavarian Illuminati, yeah.
Yes, he was an instructor at the University of Ingolstadt for 18 years. Mary Shelley started writing the book, Frankenstein, at 17 and a half years old. In the book, the creature confronts his creator and says, "I am your Adam." And I read Frankenstein a couple of times because I kept thinking, something's in there that I'm not getting. Something's in here. There's just something nagging at me. And then I finally put it all together, is that Frankenstein is an allegory about the founding of the Illuminati. All of these people that are connected to Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, Mary Shelley's parents, her father's name is William Godwin. Her mother's name was Mary Wollstonecraft. Sounds pretty Masonic, Wollstonecraft, and then she took on her husband's last name. But those guys were all involved in the whole Illuminati situation. They were involved in the French Revolution. They were involved in the Enlightenment movement, the whole Renaissance thing that was happening. They were all key players in all of this.
So they ran within the elite circles.
Yes, absolutely. And Mary Shelley's mother died 11 days after she was born. Percy dies 9 years after he meets Mary Shelley.
Yeah, people don't think numbers mean anything. I still get comments like that, which is mind-numbing to me, but numbers are symbols, folks. It's the signs and symbols that Sally mentioned earlier, and they communicate through numbers. Whether you want to embrace that or not is, that's up to you.
Yeah.
But I concluded a long time ago that numbers are very, very important.
One more thing. If you want to think about the Osiris thing, he was cut up into a whole bunch of pieces and then put back together and then given the spark of life and brought back to life. That's exactly what happens with Frankenstein. And this is all electrochemistry, and we can get into that in a minute.
That's a good point. Osiris was chopped up, dismembered, and put back together again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I didn't even think about that in relation to the Frankenstein story. Some of the things I wanted to mention, I took some notes here. I sent them over to you. Frankenstein references that I see around Billy and the Beatles. So I said that some might equate Billy as Frankenstein, having been created. We have Ringo's Back Off Boogaloo song, and the 45 RPM sleeve has Frankenstein on the cover. And Boogaloo was a nickname that the other Beatles had for Billy because Billy liked that genre of music, Boogaloo music. You mentioned Thrillington. I wrote here that Billy released an album titled Thrillington where he created the alias Percy. Of course, Mary Shelley's husband's name was Percy. Percy Thrills Thrillington. Wikipedia states that Vivian Stanshall's name, and we're talking about Victor Stanshall. This is the version of Stanshall that did not play in the Bonzos. Billy played in the Bonzos, and Billy hired Victor to play the Stanshall character so that Billy's Stanshall character could run in parallel with his McCartney character. But in any case, so Wikipedia tells us that Vivian Stanshall's name was Victor Anthony Stanshall. So there's the Victor. Victor Stanshall. So that ties back to Victor Frankenstein. Also, keeping with the Bonzo theme, the Bonzos covered the song The Monster Mash, which is a reference back to Frankenstein, as well as singing the song Look Out, There's a Monster Coming. So those were some of the notes that I took, Sally.
Yeah, and when he released that, I believe that was 1968 that he did the Monster Mash thing. 68 is an interesting date because that's the year that George Bush Jr. graduated from Yale University. I think there was like 119 students or something. The groundbreaking for the towers was in 1968. 9/11 became the number for people to call for an emergency during 9/11. Really interesting parallels there.
That took place in 1968 as well?
Yeah, and there's even an interview with David Rockefeller, you know, who's behind the towers and everything like that. And you look at his watch, and it says 9/11. And Bill was sitting on the tarmac when the towers were falling down.
Yeah, anytime something's 9/11 encoded, folks, it means that a major transformative event is going to take place or will take place.
And going back to the Thrills Thrillington, when Mary Shelley released her book, it was called the precursor to the existential thriller.
That's where you get the Thrills Thrillington.
Yeah, and he even mentioned that he did Thrills Thrillington before Michael Jackson did Thriller. And what's really interesting is that Michael Jackson, if he was born on 9/11, Bill, Paul McCartney, and Mary Shelley were all born during Mercury retrograde. During the time that Bill said that Paul attached to his shoulder, Mercury was in retrograde. When Michael Jackson released the Moonwalk was during Mercury retrograde. And if you know about Mercury retrograde, it looks like the planet is going the opposite of what it is. And you think about it, Bill was doing the opposite by playing left-handed, and Michael Jackson was doing that moonwalking thing, whatever that was. Mercury retrograde definitely falls into this whole thing. Just a little side note.
Well, look, part of their occultism, a big part of it is astrology, astronomy, tarot, alchemy, ceremony, rituals, you know.
Hermes is equated with astrology and astronomy.
Okay. So your view of the Frankenstein piece of this is it ties into the Illuminati or the creation or the emergence of the Illuminati.
Absolutely. Absolutely, dates and everything. In the novel, he'll put the date, but he won't put the decade. I think she purposely put that in there because it'd be way too too connected. I mean, nobody's ever spotted this before. She had to be very careful about the way that she worded this whole thing.
Well, you said that she allegedly wrote this book or started writing it when she was 17 and a half.
Mm-hmm.
I put that in the same category as William Shakespeare. I don't think that a 17-year-old wrote that book.
Well, yeah, Percy Shelley was not that. A lot of people give Percy Shelley credit for it, but he wasn't that much older than her. He was like 4 years older than her.
Is it possible it was ghostwritten and they were credited?
Could have been. This leads me to Frankenstein has many verses that are directly out of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner is the longest poem to date. I think it takes the Guinness Book of World Records that it's the longest poem. But it was written by a guy named Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and I wonder whether or not that has something to do with Sailor Sam, because the whole poem is about a ship. And Samuel Taylor Coleridge was very good friends with all these people that were popular during the Illuminati founding. As a matter of fact, he recited the Rime of the Ancient Mariner in the living room of William Godwin while Mary Shelley was hiding underneath the couch listening to this when she's a little bitty kid. But so many of these things, and in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, there's an ancient mariner who begins to tell the story to this guy, and he's got a right eye that is like sparkling. It looks very much similar to that picture you took. His right eye is sparkling. He's casting a spell on this guy, and he's telling the story about what happened to him. And he, killed an albatross, and it created a curse. What's really interesting is that lightning hits the ship, and the way he describes his crew, and the captain is the only one that isn't under this curse, is that they look like they're undead. They look like they, we're still alive, but they're like in suspended animation, which I thought that reminds me very, very similar to wax figures. And Madame Trudeau fits into this. Revolutionary War, when she was apprenticing, she was going downtown to the guillotine and grab heads, most interesting heads that she could find, and she'd load them up in a basket and take them back to where she was learning, and she would set those heads down and reproduce them in wax images. Isn't that interesting? This is during the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, it's a little disturbing, but yes, it's interesting.
No kidding. Very disturbing. I was reading it going, oh my God, are you kidding me? Anyway, Taylor Coleridge, he talks about how lightning hits and, these guys are under a curse and they come back to life. Well, that's based upon a mystery called The Flying Dutchman. And it was a haunted ship. Talk to any captain and they will tell you they're quite familiar with the Flying Dutchman. They've seen some weird stuff out of the water as well. But fast forward to when Bill released Percy Thrills Thrillington. It was 1977. And the same year, Rime of the Ancient Mariner was released in a cartoon with Orson Welles reading the poem. Way too much of a connection between the two.
Well, also on the cover of Sgt. Pepper, we have the wax figures of the Beatles dressed in their old attire. And I guess we could say that they got brought back to life in the form of the Sgt. Pepper band. I don't know. I think that could be a possible correlation.
This is a really interesting angle, too. The movie The Pirates of the Caribbean in Rime of the Ancient Mariner, at one point, he's looking at his men and they're still in this suspended animation. And he said, "Dead men tell no tales." Fast forward to Pirates of the Caribbean, and Bill plays in the movie Dead Men Tell No Tales. And he plays a character, his name's Uncle Jackie, he's Johnny Depp's uncle. But he's a pirate, but the last few sentences that he says is Johnny Depp's being carried away. He said, "If they disembowel you," which is a reference to William Wallace, and Vicky brought that to my attention. He also says, "Ask for Victor. He's got the softest hands."
Okay. Oh, interesting. What are they saying? Ask for the guy that's going to bring you back to life?
Well, it's definitely a reference to Frankenstein and, Victor, who played Vivian Stanchel. I mean, of all the names that he could have used, he had to use that one. These are all clues. He's been throwing clues out.
Right.
It's just that we're now catching on to it. Like the eye thing, we've probably seen a whole bunch of this stuff hundreds of times until we figured it out.
The thing is, Sally, it's because people don't expect something like that. So you're not looking for it. You're just not looking for it.
Well, when people start hearing about the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, hopefully they're going to go out and they're going to listen to it. It's on YouTube. It's narrated by Orson Welles. I mean, you could see the connection between that and Frankenstein. And then for Bill to play in a movie that features the Flying Dutchman And his few lines in the movie, he gives a reference to William Wallace and to Victor. I think that's worth paying attention to, considering everything else that we're learning here.
Yeah, but like I said, you have to have the wherewithal to pick up on that stuff.
Yep.
It's very deep. Every once in a while I say, I got to do something different. I've been doing this too long. And then something else rolls up on your doorstep. And then you get interested again. You're thinking, oh, well, what's that? Let me take a look. And before you know it, you're up to your eyeballs in it again.
You're down the rabbit hole again. And even the name Frankenstein. I learned this from, who's that guy we like? Robert Sepper. He talked about that the Illuminati was actually founded by 3 different people. There's a guy named Jacob Frank, Adam Weishaupt, and one of the Rothschilds. She encoded, or whoever encoded this book, they included the 2 people that helped with that name, Frankenstein. She took Frank from Jacob Frank, and then it would have been too obvious with the child, so she just put in another very famous Jewish name, which is Stein, which means stone. And, interesting timing, that's mentioned in memoirs, in the Whispers. It talks about the meaning of the name Stein, that it means stone. Sounds like a pretty Freemasonic name.
Well, it sounds like it might go back to the stonemasons.
Yep.
Just taking a guess here.
Quarrymen.
Yeah.
We even have, John dressed up like Pan.
Yes. That was a postcard that was included with the original release of the Imagine album.
Yeah.
So, and I'll put that in the presentation. I've got that. In fact, I've got copies of the Imagine album with that original postcard. All right, Sally, I really appreciate your time, and this is going to be a great show. And I'm glad that we did a look back after 1 year.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Mike.
All right, Sally, you have a great evening, and we'll talk soon.